The Willcox greenhouse is the 2025 Project of the Year winner in Solar Builder's 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt category. The 4 megawatt CNI project spanned 3 sites and 5 utility interconnections to power a large commercial greenhouse operation in Willcox, Arizona. The project overcame several challenges, including late-stage redesigns, but the solar installation helped the project owner reopen a facility that had been closed since 2020, bringing back hundreds of jobs to the community. Here to talk about the project are Chris Mejia and John Mittman, both with Obodo Energy Partners, which served as the EPC on the Willcox Greenhouse project. Chris is partner and chief development officer, and John is founder and CEO. Thank you guys for joining me. Just to start off, what can you tell me about the project, how it came about, and what was the timeline from start to finish?
This project, kind of the origin of it, the owner of the greenhouses had owned a much larger organization, had a fairly significant tax burden. So when they acquired this property and were looking to relaunch, greenhouse operations, they were looking to try to reduce their operating expenses, but also leverage the tax equity component of it. So in a way, it was kind of like an owner self-development kind of approach. As you can imagine, greenhouses, there's an enormous amount of water pumping, lighting, cooling, all that kind of stuff. So they use a lot of energy. This total property, there's 1,100,000 square foot greenhouses that have essentially been defunct for about 5 years since COVID and kind of shutdowns relating to, the prior operation that was running there. So it's a really exciting project that the primary goal, the outcome, was kind of focused on trying to put a system in quickly, how to get it done by the end of 2024 to kind of get the tax equity, commercial operation date finalized. And to be honest with you, it was a small miracle that all of it came together, and certainly a team effort.
One of the things that stood out to me was how the project spanned multiple sites and utility interconnections. Can you explain the project design and how the crews coordinated across those locations?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting, project. The multiple sites certainly added some complexity. I would say one of the things that really benefited us was that we had a large amount of empty land that we could use, so we weren't constrained, as we would have been in an urban environment. So that was a great assist to our production crews. But we were able to sequence this in such a way where we were able to move, kind of starting with the grading and the ground preparation, and then move into the pilings and the racking systems, and then kind of move from site to site. The scheduling and the sequencing there was, I would say, maybe kind of like a ballet in an industrial sense, but it ended up working out very, very well. For the design and engineering piece and the layout and some of the challenges, John was really instrumental in that part. And maybe, John, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so this the whole site is fed by a utility substation, but there are, again, like I said, 11 independent kind of greenhouse operation buildings there. So, what we ended up doing was we figured out a way to interconnect to 5 of the sites, 5 of the metered services. The utility company was really interested in kind of taking over ownership of the transformers, whereas before it was all, kind of held by the ownership group that had the land. So there's kind of a concerted effort there to try and we actually, which is kind of rare these days, we were given permission to connect to the transformers directly, the utility transformers directly, and that was kind of part of a negotiation that we had with them. In exchange, they're going to take over those transformers. Nowadays, most interconnection, requirement kind of, packages don't allow you to do that. So, for 5 independent interconnections, we had to scale them properly to offset each of the individual loads. But ultimately, it was going back to kind of a totalized meter at the substation. So, like Chris said, it was just kind of working the magic between all the different sites to try to get that total build out in place as efficiently and as kind of consistently as possible.
And were there any sort of considerations between the different actual installation sites and those interconnections?
Yeah, actually, so we had access theoretically to the full chain of properties, or the different services down the line there. So what we had to do is kind of evaluate the land in and around there, the topography. There was actually a pretty significant element of floodplain in this area where placement and elevations of the equipment pads was really key. So we ended up with, for most of us that have worked in the business a long time, kind of an enormous concrete pad, a couple feet high, high grade concrete, in the event that we've got a flood situation, just because, we're kind of balancing between the realities of potential flooding, but also trying to fit in the areas where it kind of made the most sense proximity wise, so we could be as cost effective as possible and also allow them to have, future development opportunities on the land that's closest to where the actual greenhouses were. Aside from the multiple locations, what were some of the challenges that you faced in building this project?
There were a couple. I'll mention a few that we experienced on the ground when we were on site with the grading contractor who had his heavy equipment kind of ready to go. The site that we had identified for the second array, or sort of the middle array on the property, he came back and he was walking in. And he said, "I can't do anything with this." And we said, "Well, wait, what do you mean?" And he said, "Come over here, take a look." And he reached down and he just kind of dug his fingers into the dirt a little bit, and he pulled up just huge clumps of string or twine. And what we learned, we asked one of the folks from the facility there if he could explain. What we learned is that they were using that as a waste dump site. And so all the string that they were using throughout these massive greenhouses, when they were done at the end of the season, they would tear it all down and they would just dump it. And the contractor said, I can't bring equipment into here. He said it gets wrapped up in the gears and the wheels and in all the bearings. He said you have to cut it out. He said this is unusable. So, I mean, really in the middle of the day, at the very beginning of the project, we had to just quickly pivot and find an alternate solution there.
Yeah, I think another, main challenge, a fundamental challenge on the whole thing, again, for anyone in the business, is how do you possibly get 5 sets of pretty large scale electrical equipment on order, shipped to the site, delivered, installed in that short time frame. So again, it was we had partnered with a group that kind of was able to had a UL kind of recertification shop that could kind of rebuild the internal guts of the gear, and it was more expensive, not enormously so, but we received 5 2,000 amp services essentially in a matter of I think it was about 65-70 days or so. So just kind of designing around what we could actually get was another element of it, to try to fit it all together properly and locate it, have it be in compliance with utility interconnection requirements. We're just, as an example, we're working with utilities right now where it's taking us months and months to just get approval of the gear before we can even order it. So again, I think the big picture, all of the challenges that we ran into, we resolved them primarily because we had a really willing Sulphur Springs, Valley Electric Cooperative utility partner, Graham County as a permitting authority, and then all of our team. We were all trying to make this, successful.
Now, this greenhouse had been dormant for 5 years. What role did this solar installation play in the owner being able to bring this facility back into operation?
It was kind of a parallel effort. They were actively refurbishing. Unfortunately, because the site was essentially dormant, it had some vandalism. So it's kind of a collective beautification of the entire site, and bringing it back up to a functional space. We were in there in parallel with groups that were actually refurbishing the actual greenhouses and getting them back up and running. By the end of the project, they had their first crop flowing. So it was pretty exciting. But it wasn't so much that the solar enabled the project to come back to life, but it was a parallel investment that they were really excited to make, to offset their operating expenses and just get everyone from the the nearby region excited to come back in there get back to work.
I spoke to a number of folks. So we had, obviously our crews, and we did sort of rotations for project management. We would be down there, folks from our team, for a week or so at a time, and got to know some of the folks in town. Willcox is a small town in rural southern Arizona, and you start to see the same people at the gas station and at the restaurants, and kind of talking through them. And everybody knew about the project. Everybody was aware of it. Everybody knew that it was coming back, and they were so excited. Just talking to folks that you would meet in town, they were so excited. They would say, "Oh yeah, my cousin used to work there. 1,000 people on site. We had more restaurants. We had more activities, more things to do, more economic activity in town." And it was a combination of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also there was a which I was not aware of. There was a tomato blight that happened around that same time that really wiped out all the crops, and it kind of just made the greenhouses just not feasible to use. And then combined with all the other things going on, that's why they had shuttered. So this project, bringing back 500 to 600 people to work at these greenhouses again, was just a really powerful economic mover for the town of Willcox. And it was great to hear everybody being very excited about it.
With this being our project of the year winner, for each of you, what was your favorite aspect of this project?
This may sound kind of strange, but I was down there on site, and as we were getting later into the fall, I want to say it was November, maybe early December, and Willcox is actually known as an area where the sandhill cranes, they stay there on their migration between the United States and Mexico. And I remember being out there one morning, and you kind of hear all this noise, you kind of hear all this commotion, and you look out into the field, and you look past the solar panels, and I saw this entire field of sandhill cranes. And if you've never seen a sandhill crane, these things are enormous. They're like 6 feet tall when they're standing on the ground. The wingspan is huge. They're really graceful, majestic birds. And there was just I had a couple moments where I got to see the sun kind of coming up over the solar panels. So you've got this nature aspect with the sandhill cranes. They're picking at bugs or worms or whatever they're eating, and in the background, this whole field of them. And it really kind of hit me that wow, what we're doing here ties into nature. We're using sunlight to kind of indirectly grow plants, which is obviously what sunlight does, but we're making it we're able to transform that energy, that sunlight, in a different way. And then the tie-in with nature, with the mountains in the background, that to me, just the whole entire project was sort of encapsulated in that moment. So that for me was very special. I mean, obviously there's so many technical things and our partnerships and the way everybody came together, but that really crystallized it for me in that moment.
I can't say I'll wax poetic quite as much as Chris there. That was a great answer. I mean, obviously that's what we live for, right? Meaning in our lives. From my standpoint, the meaning that I drew out of it, the favorite part for me was, really the partnership side of it, and how, it was a clear understanding, a clear team effort from the beginning. We were, it was an enormous challenge to meet all these obstacles, but when everyone kind of got in that same mindset, our partners, Sunstall, they were fantastic, super efficient, super proficient. Our electrical contracting partner, Icon Electric, OMCO, they were really excited. They're a large, manufacturer. This was surprisingly their first large project in Arizona, despite their manufacturing operations being based here. So for me, it was more so, just a wonderful opportunity to, really establish strong relationships with these different companies. And also, the cherry on the top is that, for the community, our company, our tagline is Spark Community, and this is just a wonderful example of that. The town of Willcox on the whole is benefiting as a result of this whole project happening, and our solar piece is just a nice kind of balance to all that.